everybody, you're watching Mr. Fugu Data Science. Today's video is RStudio data frame manipulation for somebody who's never used or very new to RStudio. We're going to do some subsetting, adding rows or columns, sorting and filtering, finding null values and duplicates, some arrange and mutate functions. You need to import Markdown, Knitter, and Tidyverse. There's two files that I'm calling in. One is a fake people dataset that I created, and here's the columns. We're also going to use a online retail dataset that I also have. Now, let's get started. Subsetting your data is very useful and will be used quite often, and you need to take into consideration a few things. Two functions, the class and type of, are very important, so you keep track of what's going on with your data. For instance, the class of the fake people data set is a data frame, but the type is of a list, so you need to pay attention. For example, when you're subsetting and you're doing this double bracket right here, you're actually going within your data frame. So you have to pay attention to what's going on, okay? So let's play around with a little bit of subsetting real quick so you get the gist of a few things that you can do. So let's decide to call in every column and only take the second row. We could play around and say, let's take only one particular row. So let's just take the second one once again. But let's take some specific columns that we decide to call in. In my case, I'm going to take the first and last name. For this specific row, we could take a group of rows or a range of rows. We can also show that you can do the same thing two different ways. So I want to just get the head of this so we're not printing out thousands of lines of code for no reason. Let's do this. So I want to nest inside of this. Then what's the other way that we can do this? So this is the credit card, which is the first column that I'm taking in. I could also call it in this way. So there's two different ways that you can do this. We can also exclude a column. So how would we exclude a column? Let's do a subset of our data and then select what we want to subset, and I'm going to use the minus sign to exclude it. And if you notice, we don't have the column for the credit card. We can take a range. So let's take a range of values. Let's take the first column. What if we want the first two columns? So we take the first two columns with rows 2 through 5. We can also do two different ways for subsetting or slicing the credit cards once again, but let's do this a little bit different. Let's take rows 4 through 7 in the first column. Let's do it a different way where we're going to take this in again, but do something a little goofy. Oh well, actually, I don't need that. Let's take in the first column and then call in the rows, and it's doing the same thing, just set up differently. So this one is calling in the first thing, which is the 4 through 7 rows, first column. We're taking the first column, taking that as a list, and then we're taking the 4th and through 7th entry. That's what's going on with that. I would like to say thank you to the new subscribers and viewers lately. It really means a lot to me. And those who have went on Github and liked my files, thank you. We can do sorting, ordering, and ranking. Sorting, you can do it in a ascending or descending order. The order returns the index where you can decide, do you want it in increasing or decreasing order? And the rank will go from highest or lowest to highest, for example. So let's look at this little list or vector that I created. So we have the lowest value, which is -4, the highest value, that's 33. So I'm sorting it with decreasing equals true, all right? So I want to go in descending order. Then, if I'm ordering this and I say I want it in decreasing order, it's taking the index position. So it's index 5, this is 6, and so it's going from 5, the next one is number 4, then 3, then 2, then 1, and then it goes back up to 7, and then 6. And then the ranking, if you notice, it says it starts at 3, so we're saying that this is the third one, this one is the first one, this is the second one. So it's going from lowest to highest for the ranking here. We can find null values. So let's look for the total NA values and sum those up for the whole data frame. We got to do is.NA, and then let's just take in our sales data. And you can see there's quite a bit of NA values for this file. We can also look by column for the NAs. Let's do a column sum, and then do the is.NA again once again, and you see that only one particular column has all of the NA values, we can then look at printing out the rows with the NA, and I'll just do 5 entries, which would be 5 through 10. So let's do that, which would be a little lengthy. Bear with me for a second. We need to do a few things. We're going to find all the unique values, and then we're going to basically separate our list out, and then we're going to use a function that's going to call in our data where we're basically taking in our X, which would be whatever we're calling. We're finding where are the NA values of our X, and then I want to take just randomly the 5th through. So now we fixed that, now it works. Now let's print off all the rows that have our NA values. Now we print off our rows without the NA values. Let's take care of some NAs and remove those. Alright, so let's take care of removing our NA values with na.omit. Then we'll do a comparison and look at the original data versus what we completed now to verify that it worked. So we notice that currently we removed the NA values from our columns. Our column of customer ID that originally had 135,000 entries. Now when you're doing removals of NA values, you need to be careful with what you're doing, because you may have a situation where you do not want to remove the NAs and maybe you would like to fill the NA with a different value, for instance. You also have to decide how many of your rows are occupied by NAs, which can be a problem if you do not have very much data. So take that into consideration before you blindly take away rows or filling in NA values with arbitrary values. Let's take this and let's replace it. And let's just create a generic variable. So we're going to use a dplyr method where we will replace the NA values. We need to call this in as a list for our customer ID, and I'm going to fill it with unknown. And what I would like to do now is sum the values to figure out if we replaced it, which we did. We can also look at this so you can see that we changed this now. Let's find some duplicates. This is pretty simple. Let's find those duplicates. We're going to retain a outputted data frame with this format. So I'm taking all rows that are duplicated and output all columns. We can also exclude duplicates or remove them simply by using the bang operator. Find unique values, which is quite easy. So we say we can find also another way of doing the same thing using dplyr. So let's do that instead of the base R version. So we will call in our little operator, and we're going to filter, where filter is taking rows. So we can also use a dplyr method to do the same thing, and we're going to call in distinct, and that'll work for us as well, and it's faster. If you notice that, we can also find rows. So let's run through this a few different ways. Use the filter method, which allows us to work with the rows, and let's take the first name of our column that has anyone named Anthony. So here's the people named Anthony. We can do this with adding a parameter if we would like. We could also do this with the dplyr as well. So let's see what that looks like. So we can do it another way with the dplyr method. As you see here, we can add parameters to make this a little more interesting. So let's do the last name as well, and let's just find someone with the last name of Garcia. So we have one line with Garcia. We could also do something pretty cool where we use grep and we find somebody that has the last name starting with GA. We find all entries of that for the last name, as you see here. We can use arrange to do some reordering or sorting of rows by a column, which is very useful. And let's arrange that by country. So you see it's arranged by country. We can use a mutate, and let's create a new column. And that new column is going to be called total price. And we're going to multiply the quantity column by the unit price. So now you see we have a new column here. We can combine rows or columns. So what I did is the same thing here. I used what's called cbind and place in the total price. We could look at that. Does the same thing. We could add onto a row. So I looked at the last part of the data frame since it basically appends to the end. And you can see that we did this. We can drop a column. So let's look at what that looks like first. So we have a comparison. And now we need to do a subset of our data for what we just updated. And we're going to use the select like we did above. And we're going to use the minus sign and call in total price. And now if you see, the total price here is no longer there for what we just subset. So we got rid of that. Let's look at what we can do with a data.table. The data.table is very interesting and useful because if you have quite large data, this is something that's pretty fast. So let's do something total by country, where we're going to basically subset our data and take only the columns of country and the total price. We need to cover that by a string. Then call in a new variable because I'm going to create my table from this, where I'm going to call in the total by country. And from that, we are going to take that new table, take all columns, and I need to create a list where I'm going to sum all of the prices, and I'm doing this by country. Let's kind of look at what's going on here. So here we go. We have our table with our country and our prices, and then what we're doing is we're summing by country for the total prices, and that's what you end up with this. Lastly, you can write to files where you can call in whatever data you're using and then the file path and then what you want to call the file. You can do the same thing for these. It's just depending on whatever option you want. Alright, this will take care of if you have, for instance, like rows that are named and you do not want it to interfere with the first column name, for instance. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if you subscribe, turn on that notification bell. As always, thank you for watching. I greatly appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.